Cool.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody. We're really happy to be here to present about Data.gov. And we have some generic overview of the program, but we'll leave most of it for questions and answers. So I am Hyon Kim, the program director at Data.gov, and it's housed in the General Services Administration, GSA. And I liked how it seemed like there were more people than the three of us working on Data.gov, but you pretty much have the entire program management office. We do have outside technical support, but through Data.gov's history, the program management office actually has been quite small. I mean, it's ranged from like 3 to 6 people. We're in an office in GSA called the Office of Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies, which houses a lot of public-facing government-wide sites like USA.gov, Challenge.gov, and also the FedGrant program that you're probably familiar with. So this is probably old news to most of our government friends here, but just in case you don't have any background on how Data.gov came about, it originates from the Open Government Initiative and the Open Government Executive Order, which was one of the first day executive orders of the Obama administration. The Open Government Executive Order focused on making government more open, transparent, collaborative, getting more citizen participation into government. And it was followed up with a more detailed directive from OMB that set forth more details on what the agencies actually had to do to comply with the Open Government Directive. And it also mandated the creation of Data.gov. So all of the agencies were required to submit at least 3 high-value data sets within a short period, and the site was developed and launched by GSA in a very short period and launched in May of 2009 with 47 data sets. For more background on the Open Government Initiative, there's a lot of information on the White House site on whitehouse.gov/open, and it basically, you have all the documentation there of the original executive order, the policies, and what the agencies were required to do. So since then, there was, in addition to the original executive order and policy, there was pretty much steady attention paid to it from a lot of White House offices, mainly the Office of Management Budget, the eGov office within OMB, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. There's an open government working group that has met every month since the executive order on open government. And so there was a lot of continued attention to increasing the amount of open data sets from all the federal agencies and submitting the metadata for those data sets onto Data.gov, which should have explained that it's a metadata catalog, so most of the data sets are actually hosted on the agency sites, but what you find on Data.gov is a comprehensive catalog of the metadata so that you can do a search crossing a lot of different agencies and find the results and ultimately go to the agency site to find the data. So Data.gov continued to grow through the continued submission of data sets by all of the agencies from 2009 up to last year. And it was supported by the fact that the whole goal of open government and open data got continued attention from OMB. But it was still sort of a case-by-case basis that agencies voluntarily continue to submit additional data sets into the Data.gov catalog instead of a more comprehensive approach. That changed last year in May of 2013 with the issuance of the executive order on open data. And it was also accompanied by a much more detailed open data policy issued by OMB on managing data as an asset. And it's actually a lot of pages and goes into a lot of what the agencies have to do beyond just featuring more data sets. But the key component for us was that agencies were now required to maintain comprehensive inventories of all of their data holdings including the ones that haven't been published on their websites. So under the OMB policy, the agencies have to create and maintain these comprehensive inventories that they report to OMB, and everything that's publicly available needs to be kept in a format that was standardized and could be harvested by the Data.gov catalog. So the big change for Data.gov in the last year was that instead of a ad hoc, case-by-case agencies submitting additional data sets, now agencies have to continually maintain a comprehensive inventory that is harvested automatically by the Data.gov catalog. So if all works well, you should be able to count on the Data.gov catalog as being this comprehensive, up-to-date one-stop for you to search for all the available open data sets on a particular catalog. So the main requirements that pertain to Data.gov was, of course, making federal data sets open as a default, but just because it's a default, obviously it does set out the exceptions for things that actually shouldn't be made public because there are statutory or regulatory reasons for not releasing it. It also doesn't mean that personally identifiable information or security sensitive information is released, but things that are outside of those categories, that the assumption should be a default, and then if the agencies choose not to release it, that they should have done an analysis of why they shouldn't release a certain data sets. So there's the link for the more detailed policy memo, and then I'll also, I'm sure Phil will talk more about the Project Open Data, which is this open site where the continuing changes in the policies on open data as well as the specifics on the metadata are all in the open, so anybody can comment on and suggest changes to the policy and also the metadata that is required for all of the federal data sets. So I'll hand it up to you here.
Hi, so I'm Phil Ashlock, and I actually joined the Data.gov team just about a year ago. Last year there was a whole lot of changes that went through with Data.gov. So not just this latest policy that kind of changed the architecture of how we pull data from agencies, but we also changed the underlying platform that we use for Data.gov, and actually multiple components of the underlying platform, and also sort of took a very strong stance on open source and being sort of very open sort of design process with user-centered design and sort of getting feedback from the public. So I'm just going to go through a few aspects of that. So this was the sort of design of the site before the latest redesign. We also changed sort of all our technical management tools and processes from a variety of internal systems that we use to manage bugs and features and the work that we did internally, and we migrated all of that to a public GitHub-facing GitHub site. So GitHub is a open source or a very social tool for managing software projects, primarily open source projects. So not only is all the code available there, but also the issue tracker and sort of the feature requests engaging with the public and your users can all happen there. So that's kind of what we transitioned all of our tools and interactions to. So both the work that we did internally and just our engagement with the public is now all public. And then the underlying platforms, so the main content management tool had been Drupal, which transitioned to WordPress, and then we'd also used some of the Drupal for managing some of the data sets, but also had an instance of Circata, which is a software as a service platform. But all the data management tools were migrated to an open source platform called CCAN, which is actually probably the most widely used platform for managing data catalogs. Just as an example of sort of, this is kind of a zoom or zoomed in or zoomed out view of one of the issues on GitHub where we sort of coalesced a bunch of different comments and issues that we got from usability testing into sort of a series of redesign iterations, so mock-ups. And if you look at this issue, which is 142 on our GitHub account, you can actually follow through and see the process that we went through, sort of going through and kind of one by one addressing a lot of the issues through a visual redesign. And of course, this is what the site looks like now. And it's sort of an ongoing process, so we continue to get feedback through GitHub, and we continue to do usability testing. We've also made the site responsive. So at least the main content side is responsive. So you can use that on a mobile phone. And, we have not yet made the rest of the site, the catalog, responsive, but I think that's something we'll be doing in the near future. Some basic stats on sort of what you can find in Data.gov right now. The main thing being the catalog of datasets. And the reason why it says datasets and collections is because there are there are a number of things on the Data.gov catalog that are counted in this number as just one dataset, but if you actually drill into them, they might include actual like a series from multiple years or multiple locations that if you were to browse through and do a search and it would come up with results for every single year or date, it becomes difficult to filter. So we grouped those in most cases into collections, so you can find like the high level item and then drill down. And so, as Hyon mentioned, we've also been very actively involved with Project Open Data, which is really kind of the implementation guidance for this latest open data policy. And so this is all managed on GitHub, and it's really kind of like a policy or an implementation guide associated with the policy that's managed like an open source project. So, so all the technical details that go along with the policy, as far as the sort of metadata standard and things like that, are all on this site called Project Open Data. And anyone can suggest edits and submit issues and suggestions for improving things. And then that is managed through a coordination between GSA and OMB. And so there's regular, pretty much every week there's review of those and then update to that. But just recently we went through, about a 6-month-long or so process of updating the metadata schema that sort of goes along with the policy. So as a sort of open standards kind of driven process with the public on GitHub, so that all was a very good, I think, example of engaging with the public and stakeholders on updating that as a technical sort of standard. And you can see also on GitHub, it's all there. And then we also have been working with OMB on a dashboard that includes both sort of automated quantitative metrics and qualitative metrics that are provided by OMB on how agencies are implementing the policy. So this actually does some automated checks on the JSON files, which is the common standard for providing each agency's metadata catalog. Looks at those and a number of other things to sort of provide feedback and tools for agencies on things that could be improved. So including making sure that the minimum requirements for the metadata are met, and now we're also moving into things like making sure that the links to the to the data sets actually still work, or that the formats are correct. So the main function here is just making sure that agencies have good feedback about what the public is experiencing with their data, but this also incorporate into the sort of analysis that OMB does with agencies. And I think that's general overview. I guess at this point we can just open it up for questions. Yeah? All right, let's do that.
We should go.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello.
So very interesting about the President's Initiative, that executive order on the open data. I am curious as to timeline. How long do they have to do their data asset inventory, and what is the progress towards it? I'm wondering, there's a lot of open data and publish your data rules, and I think a lot of people think they're just waiting out. Kind of curious, what's your progress made towards actually opening your data, or how much have you added in the last year? What's it look like? Do you have any forecast?
So that's like sort of an OMB question as well.
Yeah, so the policy has quarterly milestones which align with existing sort of they're called integrated data collections that OMB does every quarter, and so it was meant to provide about a year for the initial sort of comprehensive inventory, which doesn't mean releasing the data sets, but it means releasing an inventory of the data sets that could be released. And so the goal was to get to a comprehensive inventory by this next milestone, which is November 30th. So, sorry.
Yeah, coming up.
And I think there's pretty clear consensus that not as much progress has been made towards that goal, and there's also, I think, good momentum and sort of a good, I think, sort of process that's put in place to do these quarterly milestones. So they will continue beyond November 30th. So there's already been coordination with agencies on the milestone that's going to follow that, which will include some additional considerations like some quality more quality checks on some of the data. I mean, the challenge I think with measuring progress is you need the baseline to know, and so this inventory is meant to provide that baseline. Otherwise, it's a lot of sort of conjecture and kind of trying to find other ways to know or to have some estimate or guess about what the full inventory is. But the exercise here is to establish the baseline, and then you can actually see what has and hasn't been released, or what might be private or public.
So the project open data dashboard that Phil showed to you, if you want to go to it and check yourself, you can compare the enterprise data inventory numbers to the public data listing numbers, and see who's actually listing additional inventory numbers to you as well. And that's all online for you to look at now.
Could you say something about how you define the scope of the collection in terms of data types, and how you distinguish between data that is relevant for the collection versus data such as documents, meeting reports, textual documents that aren't necessarily part of the collection? How do you make that scoping definition of what you include versus not include?
So I think, most of that is really kind of, as much as possible described as part of the policy, about the latest data policy. So it has a definition of data, which I think distinguishes it from, unstructured content. But the other part is, I think, trying to provide some mechanisms for prioritization. So, having a sort of public feedback mechanism and other ways that they can sort of, agencies can determine where to prioritize, which data sets to release, before others, or what makes sense to them. But I think there is some still some room for interpretation there. But the main way is defined as in that policy.
Yeah, practically on Data.gov, though, there are PDF documents on Data.gov that are provided as part of the inventory currently. Well, I don't want to have to pick people. Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious about I have two sides to my question. One is based on underlying technology. You mentioned some of the open source tools that you're using. What of the NoSQL type databases that are you utilizing? MongoDB, etc., CouchDB, Hadoop, things like that. And the other part is, if you have this data and complying with the executive order, a couple that you mentioned, and we can debate the transparency of any administration going back, right? Whether Congress and the news reporters debate how transparent this administration has been, or others. Point is this about that as much as it's about innovation and fueling the economic growth with open data, or is it more about transparency and accountability?
I can take the second one if you want.
Yeah, do the first one.
As far as the NoSQL technologies, we aren't. I don't think we're really implementing any core sort of NoSQL technologies, except for just as part of search, we use Apache Solr to help with the search. But I think it's the main database is Postgres. It's part of CCAN. But something that's come up in some instances. But I think it's not something that we've investigated.
You mentioned JSON data structures, so I was curious if you found any performance advantages to go into something like an object store. If you've tested anything of that might enhance performance, or if not, is performance not really? You don't want to sit there for 5 minutes and people walk away after 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's really a factor. And I know Postgres is coming out with some newer features to use JSON as kind of a first class
Right.
object. So I think we'll probably be exploring some more of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we've found any particular need that's kind of driven us to look to migrate any of that functionality to an otherwise a NoSQL database.
Right. Now policy.
So on your second question about transparency versus innovation, so even though the initial executive order had these components of transparency, collaboration, participation, openness, I think the direction that we've seen from the White House has been pretty clear since then of not just transparency for transparency's sake when it comes to data. Their focus has really been, if you look at a lot of the data events that they've hosted at the White House and also some of the data events that some of the other agencies have held in conjunction with the open data policy, that the focus really has been on innovation, economic benefit, informing consumers of how to make better informed decisions with the data that's available that they've paid for because of all the agencies that collect this data and hold it. So I would say just from looking at how it's been, how the focus has been for pretty much the entire time that there has been a data site, Data.gov, that the focus has really been on the impact.
And so if you measure metrics by what agencies are compliant versus how much economic growth has occurred, which is a better metric, right? And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think we've made some attempts to showcase the impact on Data.gov and its similar efforts at other agencies, but the tracing of like actual specific economic benefit for particular data sets is pretty difficult. And what we're talking about is just on the dashboard is just very baseline of, we have this open data directive telling agencies for the first time that they should consider everything open as a default. So we're still at the early stages of everyone having to submit a comprehensive inventory, really for the first time, and seeing how well the agencies have been doing in meeting those like first basic steps and the baseline.
I would add too, with the new policy, independent agencies aren't mandated to comply with it, so all these, like CFPB is doing great data work, but technically they're not part of, mandated under the policy. But then in terms of transparency and accountability and that sort of thing, then the newer way, the mandated way for the CFO Act agencies is definitely a step up in transparency, and the fact that each agency is required to provide a data.json file. It's up to them, the accountability is in their hands. There's no Data.gov middleman that they could blame if something wasn't working.
Right.
I would argue that's a more accountable way to handle data management.
Yeah, just I guess one last sort of data point on that. The open data with OMB is also part of it's called a cross-agency priority goal, and the open data component is listed under their sort of innovation economic development section, but the description for open data also emphasizes transparency and accountability. So they're grouping it, I think, under innovation and sort of economic development, but also continuing to emphasize the potential for transparency and accountability and government efficiency and things like that as well.
Thank you.
We got time for lots of questions,
Okay.
by the way, so I encourage everyone who is even an inkling of curiosity to ask.
Is Data.gov a place for state and local government data as well, or is it just
Yes, it is.
So we actually do include state and local government as part of our catalog. So we essentially include them the same way that we include agencies, and are moving towards the same standard that we use. That is part of this policy. So we do depend on state and local governments already providing the metadata, and then we can be sort of a syndicate, an aggregator of that if they already provide it. But if they don't already have a mechanism of publishing it, we don't really provide that for them. We don't provide like a hosted service that they can use to input the data for the first time. We expect them to already have a way to do that.
Do they have the same requirements around metadata as the federal agencies?
Good question.
So yeah, we obviously have no, the federal government has no authority to do that for this instance. We ask them to provide as much of that as we can, and then sort of it's kind of a case by case basis. When what the minimum sort of acceptable amount of metadata is, but we do sort of try and keep the minimum, at least not the. There's a number of federal specific requirements for this metadata, so obviously those aren't included, but otherwise we kind of encourage as much of the same required field as possible.
What states would you say are doing a good job of that, and like what is required to precipitate a state like sort of participating in open data on a level that's useful to Data.gov? What are the ingredients for a successful state open data effort?
Well, those are like two separate questions, but as long as you provide the format that we need, which isn't so different than the federal agencies you're on, so all the states that are on Data.gov are doing a good job for Data.gov.
How many are there?
I think it's between 5 and 10, for exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's something that we've wanted to do more outreach, but obviously our first priority is working with the federal government, and so I think we're trying to do more to sort of provide more information backgrounds that state and local governments that want to be part of this can do so as easily as possible. So it's something we like to do more of.
And it's definitely something that we're welcome to if you have any contacts with state and local government that have open data catalogs that want to be included. All we need is the formatting and then terms of use.
Can I ask a related question on that? So when you interact with federal agencies, do you see a difference in the culture of different agencies and their willingness? I mean, they have to provide certain things under the executive orders, but do you see a difference in the culture and how willing they are to work with you guys and provide data in different formats?
I would actually say it's less apparent. There's a culture of willingness versus less willingness, and more just depends on sort of what the human resources are. So whether there's a specific person who's in a position to play a good coordinating role across the agency. So there's now a number of agencies that now have chief data officers. In fact, I think we might have one in the room somewhere.
I'm back here.
So I think things like that obviously make a huge difference, and we sort of have sort of agency-wide points of contact for each agency, but I think it varies quite a bit as far as like how much of a kind of coordinating or leadership role that person will have at the agency, and just general resources for data can vary quite a bit. In some cases, you have agencies that have been doing really good data management, metadata management for decades, and actually in some cases, like that legacy is really good. In some cases, it's because the policy is asking agencies to provide like a comprehensive inventory across the entire agency. Agencies that have a ton of good data, in some cases it's challenged to sort of unify that all in one inventory. So that they're, in some cases for smaller agencies that haven't been doing this, it's actually been simpler for them to sort of do it from the ground up for the first time. But not to discount the great work that large geospatial and other agencies that have been doing with metadata for decades, because they, a lot of this is old news to them.
It's one all the way back here.
Sure, right here, all the way. Yeah.
So I've downloaded a couple data sets from Data.gov, and I found them of variable in terms of quality, in terms of veracity, in terms of the data purporting to be what it's about, of such, of quality in the sense that columns which were meant to be date-time columns contain characters that had nothing to do with date times, etc. So are the individual agencies responsible? Do you have any kind of vetting? Do you have any kind of policy about what gets put there and whether it is what it purports to be?
I think there is
Yeah, so the responsibility for the quality of the data sets rests with the agencies, and that's actually been the case throughout the existence of Data.gov. And I think if you look at the project open data or open data policy requirements, they restate the obligations on all the agencies under the Information Quality Act to make sure that they're following their standards for accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and all that. But as we said before, I think definitely the focus going forward is going to be, once we get to a certain point on these data inventories, is on the data quality. And even though the agencies are responsible for their data sets, I'm sure we'll have some role in being able to bring to light the problems that there are with the data sets. Because we get feedback from the public, and we try to funnel that to our contacts at the agencies, but definitely going to be more of a focus on quality going to the future.
Yeah. I think it's a transparency and accountability thing too. I was at the Sunlight Foundation before Data.gov, so I'm always like, just show the data. It's like terrible, the government collects bad data. That's useful to know if the data sets are not good or not bad, and then in the future have more public feedback to improve that. I think that's
Yeah, and there is actually one of the fields as part of the metadata standard that is, it's optional, but allows agencies to know whether or not the data set does meet their the data information. Yeah, so whether or not it matches that. So
Matches what? I'm sorry.
Information Quality Act?
It's a quality management.
Okay, so a data element can be noted as being.
right.
And so this is an extension of the question about state agencies submitting data to Data.gov, but the question really relates to NGO data. So NGO data, for example, that is funded for by the federal government, is that going to be entertained as part of the Data.gov?
Yeah, we do have some data like that, mostly through the federal agencies that they work with. So it's not a lot of it, but there are instances where, because of the federal agency's role in that NGO data set, the federal agencies request or include that data set in their inventory and basically attest to the quality of it. So it's not something that we get directly, so it's not technically directly from the NGO, but so an example would be like the State Department data sets from OECD on the international testing and results of students in 8th grade or whatever. So there is a small amount of that, but we haven't talked about, there hasn't been that much discussion about beyond what's already there of data sets that come in because of the federal agency's role.
What about like NSF data? We're funded by NSF.
Yeah, NSF is in Data.gov.
Could you talk about how many man-months it took you to get to the website that you eventually showed students? I mean, a lot of that sort of lessons along the way, and so what were the lessons learned or things that didn't really work out? That's one question, and the other question is, what kind of process methodology did you use? Was it agile, or was it waterfall, or something? What did you actually use to roll out this project? And the third thing is, what is the volume of data that passes through Data.gov?
So I guess you're asking about the latest sort of redesign process. That was agile, but not in a very strict or dogmatic way, I would say. And I think we relied a lot on the existing open source tools that we're building on top of. So as far as total man hours, I guess you might factor in all the work that have gone into CCAN, all the governments that have been using and sort of contributing to that baseline before us. But we were able to start with a very solid foundation. We then built on top of that as well. But I don't know how I would sort of factor that into a metric that would be meaningful. As far as the data that's flowing through, I guess, are you asking about users or, I think as Hyon mentioned before, we don't actually host much of any data sets on Data.gov. It's mostly the metadata that references to data sets and APIs hosted on agencies. So we, in many cases, are kind of an intermediary for accessing the data. So I don't know if there's a number that would be useful in that regard for you.
Rebecca, you were recently talking to me about some data sets that you wanted to get into Data.gov, but that were difficult for whatever reason to get in. One of them was the American Community Survey. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, my comment to Travis was just that currently on Data.gov, some census information just goes to the landing page or web page, but doesn't break it down into all the different data sets. And I don't know, I think that's an example of an agency that's been doing really good data work that already has it available once you get to it. But as somebody that used census data previously, in my fantasy world, you'd be able to search Data.gov and get into the details.
Do you have any plans to create like a public submission tool where the public can, not in terms of data, but in terms of here's government data at this URL, do you already have it in your catalog? I feel like that would be helpful for state and local governments that don't necessarily have the capacity to submit that, but also to be able to cross-reference that information with the data catalog.
So you mean a submission to track data sets that have already been published, that are already online, and to see whether or not they're as a like request, or just as a quick tool to check to see whether or not it's already there?
Both. I mean,
that's a good idea. I mean, I don't think we've. I mean, you could definitely just use the search box to to the extent that that's useful. But as far as a request system, we actually have been in the process of implementing this, and it is. We have kind of a variety of ways that we get input from the public, including data set requests or things are broken. We're looking to unify that in a sort of more structured way. It is also a requirement for the open data policy that each agency provides a feedback mechanism. Most of those have been pretty basic and rudimentary, but I think we're looking to try and do something similar that we do with the metadata, which is to say, provide sort of more unified way of tracking and managing those requests across government. So even if an agency has their own internal system, that we can sort of feed into that and pull from that as well.
my other question was, are you looking into any sort of software to clean up agency data? Like I feel like when you look at any one agency's data, the challenges are usually the same. Like NTSB has pipe delineated data. FEC has internals, enters in their address lines. Like, is there anything, OSHA has, their employer names are usually very different. Do you have anything?
So right now, I think we've just started to move into the most basic level of that, which is just making sure that the data is, the link to the data even works or is matches the standard that for the format that it was specified as. And so I think our next step is actually doing more in-depth analysis. But if you have suggestions on tools, we would definitely love to hear that, or just there are things like Open Refine that can help sort of normalize fields and things like that. That I think we can help provide suggestions to agencies and things like that. But I think we're definitely open to hearing suggestions on tools that we can do to provide that kind of automated analysis.
I think beyond Data.gov too, as you see things pass like the Data Act, FEC data, particularly 18F, is doing an open FEC project. You can check out their GitHub to see their progress on that. But I know a lot of the reasons they have those sorts of errors is because they have a lot of different input mechanisms, so it's a bigger problem.
Just follow up on checking the data sets, making sure that they're pointing to the right kind of content. Is that work happening on GitHub? Is that in a branch somewhere for people to contribute?
Yes, I mean mostly that is part of the Project Open Data dashboard, which I showed briefly on the slide. So that website combines sort of both the qualitative stuff that OMB does, but also some automated analysis. And so we're just in the process of rolling out some new automated analysis that does just check for links. And I could point you to that link. It's the Project Open Data dashboard repository as part of the GSA GitHub account.
Going forward from compiling all of the data and getting it together, does Data.gov have any initiatives for civic engagement and getting people to use the data, and how effective do you think we've been in promoting it?
Well, to date, Data.gov has topic areas. We may or may not have a topic area lead in the room. Just keep coming back to Dan.
I'm still here.
Public safety is
Yes.
his topic. And that has been one way, sort of updates and highlights and impact tracking has been tracked to date. I think going forward, topics will still exist, but it's like unclear. So any suggestions are welcome. But just to be clear about the way topics are on Data.gov right now, they're definitely either they come out of an OSTP initiative or some other government initiative, and they have a lead, and then they're cross-agency curations of data sets where they sort of like try to highlight certain data sets.
Just on engagement in general, whether it's, responding to the public comments and questions we get, or, more proactively trying to engage with the public to encourage data use. I mean, I think that that's definitely a priority, but it's also, there's 3 of us right now, and, hours in the day, and I'm sure you could get a sense from the review of the open data policy and this dashboard, how much work there is in working with the agencies to help them meet the open data policy requirements, and just, have their inventories in a shape that can be harvested by Data.gov. But yeah, it's definitely something that we like to do more of.
And again, that's also something that is included in the policy. So as far as agencies having events and sort of convenings with their stakeholders, there's definitely a lot of encouragement, and we try and participate in those events and speak at events like this when we can. Yes, sorry, yeah.
This is somewhat related, but is there any plans in the future to encourage the agencies themselves to collect more comprehensive data? Like I know, like this is just making data available that's already existing. Is there any initiatives to make more data?
Well, that's a fun policy question.
So yeah, I know that there's a lot that Data.gov itself plays a role in that, but I know that there are a number of new sort of initiatives, whether around crowdsourcing. I mean, there are a number of things that are sort of trying to look at broader forms of data collection. I also have a personal interest in sort of seeing what more opportunities there can be for better cross-governmental sort of data coordination. So, state and local government, federal governments working together more. So, because we do sort of play a unique role in aggregating data like that in one place, I think there could be more that we could do to sort of provide suggestions or guidance on opportunities like that. But yeah, I mean, it's not really a role that we play in general in terms of expanding how data is collected by agencies.
Not exactly collection, but in that bucket, I would also add that there's been a little bit of efforts to sort of match data that's been FOIA'd for and make sure that that's proactively released in larger structured formats, so that it doesn't always have to be FOIA'd for. And there's a couple initiatives to that effect.
I'm trying to compare this effort with what the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration is doing with its Big Data Partnership Program to make more of its various geophysical and weather data sets available in the cloud for resale. The reason that they're doing that is they have more data than they can publish openly through structured systems such as either their own or Data.gov. And that's an interesting model for making data available to the public, because it's essentially saying we have some inherently governmental programs over here, such as Data.gov, which make the catalog available. And on the other hand, we also have other programs that we're developing that are designed to make the data exploitable by the private sector. And I'm just trying to, this is just a general comment, but it's interesting how these two different approaches seem to, or should be working together. One to make data accessible as an inherently governmental role, but the other is the government doesn't have enough money to market organize, sell, and productize the data as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's not really a separation there so much. I mean, I think the reason why NOAA is looking into these approaches is they are in a rare situation where the cost of providing that infrastructure to that sort of is not it might make more sense to have some help from direct data users to support that, but I don't think that the cost is around the openness or the access, or it's not like they're paying for a license or intellectual property rights to that data. It's simply the cost of the infrastructure to provide access to the data. So I don't think that there's anything that would prevent someone who is able to, or alternate approaches that can provide that data free of cost to do so. It's just that there is that challenge of the enormous scale of that particular kind of data that I think is requiring sort of an experimental approach. I don't want to sound like I'm speaking about any of this authoritatively. I mean, this is something that I think we're just now starting to see some kind of experimentation with, but I don't think that really is separate from the idea of providing data for innovation, economic development through Data.gov, and NOAA's data sets will continue to be listed as part of Data.gov with provided through infrastructure like that. I think just the same. It's just I think there are some instances where just the size and scale. It's because to date most of that kind of data had not been made available at all because of those challenges. So I think they're slowly looking at ways that they can address those challenges.
I would add to, not authoritatively, that you can imagine in the future a variety of different data initiatives from the federal government, like the Data Act or other things that hone in on a particular data set, and maybe also apply funding for that sort of thing.
So I actually did some work with healthcare, HHS data, CMS data, about a year and a half ago. And to get to those data sources, I went right to CMS. It was a CMS site or whatever, something in HHS. Well, is that the future would be to have it all centralized on Data.gov and not go to the agency site, or where would I eventually get the data if I'm interested in healthcare, or if I'm interested in FDA, or would it be on the agency specific sites, more up to date, more timely, more relevant, maybe more specifically trusted data, or would Data.gov be the ultimate trusted data source?
So the current sort of process for how metadata is published and then syndicated and aggregated on Data.gov is that we synchronize pretty much every 24 hours. It's the typical process. Well, like we said before, most of the data, like 99.9% of the data is not hosted on Data.gov. So we play the role of sort of providing a kind of a normalized standard aggregated place to search across data sets. But I think agencies and data publishers are always going to be the authoritative source that know the data the best. That might have that their website will be where the best documentation and things like that is. I think we're just trying to provide sort of the a layer that can kind of unify the most basic sort of parts of that metadata to facilitate sort of easy searching across and ensuring sort of like there's a baseline across all data sets.
Okay, thank you.
I want to go back, Phil, to something you said a few minutes ago about government-to-government data sharing or government-to-government use of Data.gov. I feel like whenever we hear about the benefits of open data, we hear typically about the private sector applications. Just out of curiosity, are there any sort of success stories that you can point to of agencies using Data.gov to make their own internal processes or their data sharing easier?
This question comes up a lot. I mean, the most obvious example that I can think of is just from the work that I've done. For example, the dashboard which I helped to build, that builds on top of an API that data set that GSA had already provided as a directory of all government agencies. So I mean, there are things like that are, I think, very sort of obvious that they have broad applicability and are useful for lots of government things. But I think that's something that we could definitely play a larger role in finding those opportunities and highlighting them to I think that helps paint, sort of the larger picture of the value of open data and might, be a new motivating factor for some data publishers as well. Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. The Data.gov catalog is shared with Geo Platform. It's a single catalog. And we're just finalizing this now, but on the Geo Platform by theme, all these the national geospatial data assets will be listed by theme, pulled out of that catalog. Already my folks at EPA wrote me a note and said, Wendy, we have to come up with a process to figure out what other data services are available from other agencies. I said, wait a second. Here is the list of the 188 data sets. Let's start here, because this is our geospatial community. You don't have to go calling 100 people. It's here. This is where you should go. And I guess the same thing could be applicable for any of your topic areas or whatever. People should go there first before reaching out to hundreds of people across the government. So that's agency specific.
No, that helps.
Does Data.gov provide a crosswalk between various data sets, such as one federal agency could have useful data sets for another federal agency and such? Could you elaborate on any type of crosswalks Data.gov might have?
So, I mean, one that has come up is actually just something that's useful for those implementing the metadata as part of the policy, which is, there's a number of different identification systems used within the federal government. OMB has their own IDs and Treasury has their own IDs, and so there have been a couple instances where we've just needed to provide, a basic spreadsheet that sort of shows those, so that if they're implementing this policy with existing metadata or data sets where they can already reference one of those IDs and they need to reference another one, they can do that easily. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we can do more of and look for more opportunities for common data standards and things like that. But
And then there's those data act opportunities too.
right.
Like a standardization of the metadata for Data.gov?
Oh, that exists.
So the open data policy is built around a common metadata standard, which is based on.
That's a guideline for federal agencies to submit their data sets in that manner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's based on DCAT, which is a more broadly used metadata standard as well, which includes Dublin Core and a lot of sort of existing metadata standards.
You can see various mapping on project within data.
Right.
Okay.
Are you guys looking at opportunities to do cool things with search now that you're getting this metadata? Like data set recommendations, like I look for bridge. I might also be interested in all of these other physical infrastructure data sets or any sort of those kinds of things to see if that could be sort of more effective to create some facets or themes on your own and extract some of that stuff from the metadata that the agencies are supplying you. Have you looked at any of that?
I don't think we've looked at it in terms of sort of inferring like taxonomies or things like that. I think there's definitely room to experiment there. I'm sure we'd have to be cautious about it in some instances, but yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about that. It's not something that we have really, I think, thought a whole lot about. We've definitely relied on a lot of curation for a lot of the stuff that's not already provided within the metadata itself.
Along those lines for the search, how are the data sets or the metadata tagged so that way when you're doing a search, your certain keywords and stuff would bring up certain metadata?
The search is powered by Apache Solr, and then we have there's a lot. I mean, pretty much all the facets or the filters that you see on the left-hand side of the main catalog interface are sort of the primary options that you can filter by. But in most cases, just about any key value pair that's part of the metadata is something that you can actually search and filter by. Unfortunately, we don't document that nearly as well as we could, and so I think that's definitely a large room for improvement in terms of providing a sort of a much more sophisticated sort of guide for doing advanced searches. And you can kind of, I think, get a little bit of feel for it if you just rely a lot on those filtered search options on the left-hand side, but things like Solar actually provide a very robust set of query sort of parameters and filters that you can do, including searching for time ranges and date ranges and things like that. We don't document that nearly as well as we should, so that's definitely an area where we can improve. Yep.
If you have infinite resources, even if you had infinite resources, are there things about using data that you deliberately not want to go towards that you think are lacking in terms of other people stepping in and doing? So if it is, creating connections between data sets in some controversial way, what are those controversial ways across the board that you'd like to see other groups that maybe have agendas go into? What's really lacking in terms of the general ecosystem of data enthusiasts?
What are the things that we'd like to see other people do but we don't want to do?
Yeah.
Interesting, I don't think we've really thought about that. Well, I have an idea, so I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I will make a plug for, a lot of the data sets on Data.gov have a maintainer email attached to them. I want to see more direct contact with maintainers of data sets, about their data sets. I feel like we get a lot of public feedback directed towards us that are either research questions or and this is part of our building a better system for dealing with public feedback generally. But I just want the public reaching out to these data set maintainers and making sure that they're awake and that they could change things. Spamming, I just spam.
Do you keep and or publish statistics about the very active data sets, who's using what? I'm not saying that, by trying to identify which people are using data sets, but doing any kind of demographic analysis and usage analysis of data sets and cross usage of data sets, possibly by the same person, object, organization?
So we do have sort of high-level metrics that we actually publish on data set usage. I mean, it's limited to what we can capture, and since we're largely an intermediary, we can't necessarily include anything that goes around Data.gov and might go directly to an agency. But there's nothing that we really capture that I think gives a ton of. Without doing, I guess, more sophisticated analysis than we've done. To be tracking any kind of real rich demographics other than the kind of basic things that you get through things like Google Analytics and things like that. But even then we're sort of anonymizing a lot of that as we're required to do and things like that. So I think there's definitely more of an opportunity for us to sort of look into that kind of data more to get a better sense of user bases that could use more attention than they're getting, but it's not something we've done a whole lot of so far.
Why don't we take one more question? Or not?